Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in World History. Today we're going to move on with our Consequences of Imperialism lecture into Part 3. And it's really an extension of Part 2, to be honest. Because in Part 2 we looked at the horrible massacre, the horrible genocide that occurred in Rwanda in 1994, where Hutus killed 800,000 Tutsis. Well, here in Part 3, we're going to see a similar story just north and to the west of Rwanda in an African country called Sudan, but specifically in a place in Sudan called Darfur. So again, we want to make sure we understand what question we're looking at here, and we're going to focus on question number 2. Question number 2 says, compare and contrast the events that occurred in Rwanda in 1994 and the events that occurred in Darfur in the early 2000s. So that's what we're going to work with here. We've already got the Rwanda story. Let's make sure we get the Darfur story. So let's just take one quick recap of where we are and where we're going with this lecture. Like I said in the previous story, Section 1, we covered unrest in the Balkans, which was part of the start of World War I. In Part 2, we looked at the genocide in Rwanda. In Part 3 today, we're going to look at the genocide in Darfur. And these are very much related in terms of death, and that's horrible. They aren't related events and one cause the other. I'm not trying to say that, but imperialism does play a role in making both of these happen. We'll finish with Part 4 later on by looking at Gandhi and the independence movement, but we're going to focus on Darfur here today. Darfur, which is a region of western Sudan, has had some major stuff going on really since the early 2000s. This is very recent history here. Lots of people have been moved away from their homes, but more importantly, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. And this is a direct result of imperialism, because once the Europeans relinquish their control, now what you're doing is you're allowing a power vacuum in Sudan to be assumed by those with weapons and those with power. And if they choose to mistreat the people with that weapons and power, then of course you're seeing some negative things happen. So this is definitely tied into when the Europeans controlled Africa and have since left Africa. So let's talk about this region of Darfur. It's located in western Sudan and was formerly controlled by both Egypt and the British, abbreviated here by UK. So you definitely had former powers controlling this region. And in this process, we have seen civilians that have been killed, tortured, raped, displaced, and homes burnt. So people have really been very mistreated in this region of Darfur. Since 2003, 300,000 men, women, and children have died, and 2.6 million have been displaced from their homes and now live in refugee camps. And refugee camps are a really awful place to live. Refugee camps are often kind of held together by, groups like the American Red Cross and Amnesty International, sometimes the UN, groups that can help provide aid, shelter, water, food, things like that. But they're not these people's homes. They're camps. They're often overcrowded. There's often food shortages. There's only so much that other groups can do to help. So people have been moved off their homes. Now, why has all of this happened? What's going on here in this region? Well, the government of Sudan and a group called the Janjaweed are responsible. And you want to say, well, why don't we just go in there? Why don't we stop this? And by we, I mean it could be the Americans, it could be the United Nations. It's not that easy. It just isn't that easy of a solution to send people in to stop one group from treating another group poorly. So the Janjaweed, there's a term that's used to describe mostly armed gunmen in Darfur, people like you see here. And there are groups that are looking into this, that are trying to locate those responsible and bring them to justice and bring them to trial. But when you want to move into a region like this and you come across a group of guys like this that are willing to shoot and kill you, it makes it very difficult for peacekeeping groups to move in there. So there's a real definite abuse of power going on here in Sudan, specifically when it comes to Darfur. So In the past, the Janjaweed had been at odds with Darfur's population over natural grazing grounds and farmland, as well as rainfall, and because water becomes scarce. So you really want to say, why is this going on? Why are they kicking these people out? Why are they killing people? It's because the land in Darfur, I mean, you're in the northern part of Africa. You're close to the Sahara Desert. You're talking about competition for the land that will sustain life, the land that will produce crops and be able to graze animals so that people can live. And if you don't have access to that, it might mean you die. So there are people who are willing to take guns and move people away and kill people over this land. Humanitarian efforts have been difficult due to the remoteness of the area, attacks by armed assailants on aid workers, and roads being under Janjaweed control have made it just really difficult for people to get in there and stop this. And so, you know, you want to be able to say, we can send troops there, we can help out, but it's just not that easy, given the geography of the area. The UN and Amnesty International are attempting to move in and stop the atrocities today, but a peaceful solution or a peaceful political end has not yet been achieved. The UN doesn't want to go in there with guns blazing. The UN doesn't want to go in there and start shooting people or being shot at. They want to try to achieve an end to this peacefully, but if you've got a group of people who don't want to end it, and certainly are the ones that have the guns, it makes it very difficult for any of that to happen. So Darfur is a really, really rough place to be right now. As you can see down here, numbers in this little image are a little bit higher. 400,000 people killed, 2.5 million people displaced, rape and murder every single day, and the genocide continues. So this is something that is still very, very current, something that is still going on in the modern world today. Here's another picture of the Janjaweed. Again, these men with guns, if they're told to kill outsiders or they're told to go take land and take it by force because it might mean their survival, I mean, they're willing to do it. So you've got an abuse of power with weapons going on here in Darfur. Here's some of the refugee camps. You can see this is a very dry region. This is not a natural habitat for people. This is a safe area. It's moved away from where the fighting is going on, but it doesn't mean that these people are comfortably living here and making a life for themselves. They don't want to be in these refugee camps. Refugee camps, are only as successful as the food and supplies that are brought in there, and if they don't have that, then they're going to have to move on to somewhere else. Stop the genocide in Sudan. I found this image, thought it was very appropriate, just sort of like a picket sign trying to bring people's awareness about what's going on in Sudan. And then this is a perfect way to end this. We saw, of course, Rwanda in the previous lecture and the 800,000 that were killed there. So it says, he who does not learn from history is doomed to repeat it. Well, they changed it to say, he who does not learn from Rwanda is doomed to repeat it in Darfur. So certainly have two incidences going on here in Africa in the last 20 plus years where hundreds of thousands of people have died. And this is all linked back to imperialism. If the Europeans had not come in and taken the goods and divided the people and pitted them against each other, you likely wouldn't have these kind of situations going on today. Okay, let's wrap up our story on Rwanda and Darfur by looking at question number 2. Question number 2 says, compare and contrast the events that occurred in Rwanda in 1994 and the events that occurred in Darfur in the early 2000s. Now, certainly the comparison in these cases are a lot of people died. We're talking 800,000 people dead in Rwanda, hundreds of thousands dead and displaced in Darfur. Certainly there's death in both cases. But the differences certainly are plentiful. Where it was Hutus killing Tutsis in Rwanda, certainly looking back at how the Belgians came in and favored the Tutsis, the Hutus saw themselves as oppressed, and eventually once the Rwandan president's plane went down, they started their final solution, their plan to rid Rwanda of the Tutsi population. They actually come very, very close to doing that. They end up killing 800,000 Tutsis in just a matter of weeks. In Darfur, we've got a militant group called the Janjaweed who is really trying to move people out and kill people over grazing grounds. It's a dry area. You're near the Sahara Desert. You're in Sudan, which is just south of Egypt. And so you have a lot of death occurring there, rape as well, because one group has power and wants land. And there have been connections to the Sudanese government there. It's a really sad situation that is, in a way, it's still going on. It's not as bad as it was in the early 2000s, but I think those responsible have fled, and they are being prosecuted, or at least attempted to be prosecuted, but have not been caught yet. Of course, another comparison here is both of these situations occurred in Africa, not entirely close to one another, but certainly not far away. Rwanda is further south and to the east from Sudan. But it is a comparison there, looking at how the Europeans, with the Berlin Conference, really came in and took hold of Africa. And later on, the African people have to fight the African people. And that's what happened in both of these situations. And we can tie that back to imperialism. So that's a real roundabout way of answering this question. But you want to make sure you use details to compare and contrast these, because there's certainly a lot of similarities and a lot of differences in both of these stories. And they're both entirely tragic. They're just horrible things that shouldn't happen, especially in the modern era. Both of these happened during my lifetime. One of these happened during your lifetime. And it's really sad that they even existed or occurred at all. So we're going to end there. Hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.